All right, let's just get right into it. If you've ever spent hours, and I mean hours, enumerating Active Directory only to end up more confused than when you started, yeah, this one's for you. We've all been there, right? You're just drowning in data, but you can't find a single drop of clarity. And this quote, it just hits so close to home. It's this idea that if you just run one more command, pull one more list, you'll somehow brute force your way to understanding. But it never works, does it? You don't get a clean picture, you just get this massive pile of information overload. You end up working way harder and not any smarter. So that's what we're here to do. Think of this as the antidote to all that chaos. We're going to break down the most common mistakes, the ones that drain your time and your confidence, and then we'll lay out a simple, clear workflow so you can build a manual ad map that actually makes sense. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why on earth would I do this manually? We have tools like BloodHound for this. And look, that's a totally fair question. But this isn't about finding a workaround for when you can't install a tool. This is about a fundamental shift in your mindset. Let's just compare the two for a second. The graph-first approach, yeah, it's fast, but it can also lead to this kind of blind trust in what the tool is telling you. The manual-first approach, on the other hand, it forces you to build a mental model inside your own head. You start to understand why a privilege path exists, not just that it's there. And that is absolutely critical in restricted environments where you can't just run whatever you want. So the real win, the big takeaway here, is that you build a mental model you can actually trust. You learn to second-guess your tools, you understand the logic behind all the connections, and you save yourself a ton of rework later on. Okay, let's get into the weeds now. We're going to talk about 5 super common analysis traps. These are the little process errors that will completely sabotage any chance you have of building a clean map. This is hands down the most expensive mistake you can make. Not in dollars, but in wasted time. Before you type a single command, you have to stop and ask, what am I actually allowed to see and from where? If you just dive in without confirming your scope, you're basically guaranteed to generate a whole lot of useless data. And, in a real engagement, that can lead to some pretty awkward conversations. And this number really drives the point home. 50 minutes, almost a full hour of notes that were totally unusable, all because there was no clear scope. Don't be that person. A 5-minute check at the start will save you an hour of pain later. So, trap number 2 is thinking there's a single source of truth. The reality of AD is that it's messy. LDAP gives you the structural, official story, but then other things like DNS or SMB file shares, they tell you the story that the admins think is true. When those two stories don't line up, that's not an error, that's a clue. The most interesting stuff almost always lives in those little contradictions. I absolutely love this analogy. We've all done it, right? You run these huge, messy LDOP queries just hoping something useful will pop out. It's like mashing all the buttons on a vending machine. But the fix isn't about writing more complex queries. It's about asking better questions. So instead of dump all the groups for me, you ask something specific, like, show me which groups have admin rights over this one specific OU. And believe me, this isn't just theory. The time you save is real. Getting into the habit of asking targeted questions can easily save you 25 minutes every single time you go through a domain. You stop drowning in data and you start seeing the actual relationships. Okay, this one is subtle, but it is deadly. You see a server name, it's got DC in it, or maybe a share that looks like SYSVL, and your brain just leaps ahead and fills in the blank. Aha, that's a domain controller. And just like that, you can waste the next 30 minutes chasing a rabbit down a hole, all based on nothing more than a naming convention. And what's so great here is how simple the fix is. It's just a tiny little change in your internal monologue, that little voice in your head. Instead of just stating a conclusion, you form a hypothesis. This little switch turns every piece of info from a potential trap into a chance to validate something. This last trap is just a total process failure. You find an awesome connection, you get that little rush of discovery, and you think to yourself, oh, I'll totally remember how I got here later. No, you won't. Not after lunch. Definitely not tomorrow. If you don't write down your reasoning, your notes just become meaningless text. And come on, this is just a perfect and hilarious way to put it. Your own notes become a crime scene that you have to investigate. The lesson here is pretty simple. If you can't explain why something matters in 2 sentences right then and there, you probably don't really understand it yet. All right, so we've covered the process mistakes. Now let's dig into 2 specific technical areas that create these huge blind spots for pretty much everyone doing manual analysis. It's really easy to look at a GPO, a group policy object, and just judge it by its name. But the real risk, it's usually not in what the policy does. The question that's way, way more critical is who has the right to edit this thing? A policy that sounds totally boring but can be edited by the wrong group of people, well, that's basically a loaded gun waiting to go off. So here's a super simple way to think about it. It's a triage framework. First, check where the policy is applied, the link target, but then immediately check who has edit rights. That's the part people almost always skip. The actual settings inside the policy are often the least important piece of the puzzle for your initial risk check. The second big blind spot is ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services. So many people just skip right over this because, it feels way too complicated. But here's the deal. Certificate services can create some incredibly powerful privilege escalation paths that are completely invisible if you're only looking at groups and OUs. And you don't need to be a world-class expert on your first pass. Just follow this simple checklist. Is ADCS even installed? Who owns the certificate authority role? Just making a note that it exists dramatically improves your view of the environment. Ignoring it isn't being efficient. It's choosing to be blind. Okay, we've talked about the traps, we've covered the blind spots, so now for the payoff. Let's put this all together into a clean, repeatable workflow that will take you from absolute chaos to a map that's actually actionable. And here it is. This is the path forward, a 90-minute time-boxed process. You see how it starts with defining scope? That avoids our very first trap. From there, it moves logically from the basic structure to the privilege. Then it hits our key blind spots with policy and certificates, and it all ends with validation. This isn't about trying to boil the ocean. It's about getting clarity fast. And really, that brings us to the core philosophy of this whole thing. A clean AD map, it's not some heroic data dump of every single object in the directory. It's a story told through a sequence of small, validated claims. Every single piece is something you can prove and you can explain. So I'll leave you with this final thought. That shift in thinking from dump everything to answer one single question, that's what makes all of this manageable and meaningful. So think about it. The next time you sit down, what is the one most important risk question you need an answer to? Start there.